It was one of those unusually quiet evenings in early spring, the kind where the sky is painted in soft hues of lavender and rose, and the breeze carries the scent of fresh, cut grass. I had just returned from the grocery store, a simple, ordinary trip, but the kind I liked to do alone. No rush, no chatter, just the soft hum of the radio in my car, and the comfort of picking out fresh vegetables with no one rushing me along. My son Eric had decided to stay home. At 23, he was back from college for a while, taking some time off after graduation to figure things out. I wasn't pressuring him. I remembered how lost I had felt in my early 20s, and I wanted to give him space to breathe, to think without the constant noise of expectations. It was nice having him around again. The house had been far too quiet since he moved out. When I walked through the door, the house had that faint smell of worn wood and lemon cleaner. Eric was in the living room, stretched out on the couch with one of those old detective movies playing, the ones I used to watch with his father back in the day. He looked up as I entered and gave me a smile, not one of those polite ones, but a warm, genuine grin that tugged at something deep inside me. "Hey, Mom," he said, sitting up a bit. "Need help with the bags?" I told him no, that I didn't have many, and walked into the kitchen, setting the brown paper sacks on the counter. He followed me, leaning against the door frame, the way he used to as a teenager, always watching quietly while I worked. We talked about small things as I unpacked, how the job hunt was going, how strange it was adjusting to being back home, how my garden was already sprouting early. He wasn't his usual distracted self tonight. He was present, attentive. I could feel his eyes on me as I moved around the kitchen, and I found myself slowing down, becoming oddly aware of my movements. Dinner was simple: roasted chicken, steamed green beans, and mashed potatoes. We ate at the small round table near the window, the same one that had been in our kitchen since Eric was in diapers. The sun had almost set by then, casting golden light through the curtains, making everything feel warmer, more intimate. He told me about a girl he dated in college, someone who left him a little bruised, though he didn't say it like that. I saw it in the way he talked, the careful way he chose his words. I listened, nodding when he needed space and laughing gently when he made a joke at his own expense. It had been a long time since we talked like this, really talked. After dinner, we lingered at the table. I poured us both a small glass of wine. He didn't usually drink with me, but tonight felt different. Maybe it was the stillness in the house, or maybe we both needed something more than food to fill the space between us. At some point, we moved back to the living room. He sat on the couch, and I curled up in the armchair across from him. We talked about movies, about memories of his childhood, the trip to Yellowstone, the time he broke his arm falling off the neighbor's swing. I noticed the way he looked at me, not as a child to a parent, but as a man looking at someone he cared about deeply. I don't know when that shift happened, but it wasn't unwelcome. It was just unexpected. I found myself smiling more than usual. My cheeks felt warm, and it wasn't just the wine. He asked me about my own life, about the years after his father passed, about how I'd managed all those years alone. Most people didn't ask, but he did, and he really listened. His eyes didn't drift to his phone, and he didn't nod out of politeness. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, his expression soft and focused. "You're stronger than you think, Mom," he said softly. "I don't know how you did it." His voice caught a little at the end, and I saw a flicker of something vulnerable cross his face. I reached over and took his hand without thinking. It was an instinct, the way you do when you want someone to know they're safe. I did it for you, I said. You were the reason I got out of bed every morning. He didn't let go. His thumb gently brushed the back of my hand, and I felt a jolt of something stir inside me. Not inappropriate, just deep, emotional, raw. We sat like that for a moment. The room was silent except for the old grandfather clock ticking in the hallway and the faint hum of the refrigerator. The lights were dim, casting shadows that danced gently across the walls. I wish I could give something back, he said quietly, for all the things you gave up for me. You already have. I replied, but even as I said it, I realized I didn't quite know what I meant. Maybe it was just the feeling of being seen, truly seen, not just as a mother, but as a whole person. He looked at me for a long moment, and something in that gaze made me feel unsteady, like the floor beneath us had shifted ever so slightly, not in a way that scared me, just enough to make me aware of something new, something we hadn't named. I stood to take the glasses back to the kitchen. He followed a moment later, leaning in the doorway once again as I rinsed them in the sink. His presence behind me felt close, familiar and unfamiliar all at once. When I turned around, he was right there, his face only a breath away. For a moment I thought he might say something, but he just smiled a little sadly and reached up to tuck a strand of hair behind my ear. It was such a small gesture, but it left me breathless. Thanks for tonight, he said. It meant more than you know. Then he kissed my cheek gently, softly, and went upstairs. I stood in the kitchen for a long time after that, listening to the soft creak of the stairs as they settled, feeling the lingering warmth of his touch on my skin. Something had shifted between us. I didn't know what it meant or where it would lead, but I knew that night would stay with me forever. I didn't sleep much that night. I lay awake in my bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the old house breathe. It creaked in familiar ways, wood expanding and settling, the wind brushing against the windows. But everything felt slightly changed, as if something invisible had rearranged itself between us. I kept going over that moment in the kitchen, the way Eric had looked at me, the way his fingers had brushed my cheek, like I was something fragile and important. It had been so tender, so full of emotion, that I didn't know what to do with it. I'd always been his mother, his protector, his safe place. But now I wasn't sure what I was anymore. I wasn't sure he was either. By morning, I'd convinced myself it had been nothing, a soft moment, too much wine, a long talk between a mother and son who had missed each other more than they realized. But when I came down the stairs and found him already in the kitchen, hair a mess, making coffee in that old hoodie I'd washed 1,000 times, he looked up at me like he had been waiting. "Morning," he said, his voice still thick with sleep. "Morning," I answered, trying to sound casual. I moved to the cupboard to grab a mug, brushing past him. His hand lightly touched the small of my back, steadying me even though I didn't need steadying. It lingered for a second longer than it needed to, and when I looked up, his eyes were already on mine. "You okay?" he asked. I nodded too quickly. "Fine, just didn't sleep much." He poured me a cup without another word and handed it to me. Our fingers brushed again, and neither of us pulled away immediately. There was an unspoken awareness in the air, like we both knew something was there, but were too afraid to name it. We spent the day doing nothing in particular. He offered to help clean out the attic, something I'd been putting off for years. It was full of boxes from his childhood, from his father, from a life that had passed far too quickly. We laughed a lot up there, found his baby blanket, his old soccer cleat, photo albums from our trip to Maine. But every so often, I'd catch him looking at me with that same quiet intensity, and every time my chest would tighten. At one point we sat on the dusty floor, knees touching, flipping through a photo album of him as a boy. There was a picture of me holding him on my lap when he was no more than 4. His face covered in chocolate, mine lit up with a laugh I barely remembered. "You were beautiful," he said suddenly. I looked up from the photo and saw he wasn't smiling. He meant it. "You still are," he added, softer now. I tried to brush it off with a chuckle. "You're biased." "No," he said. "I just never really looked before, not like this." My heart skipped. I could feel the air shift again, thick with something unspoken. I should have said something. I should have changed the subject, laughed it off. But I didn't. Instead, I just looked back down at the photo, my fingers tracing the edge of the image. The silence stretched, but it wasn't awkward. It was heavy, intimate, electric. Later that evening, after we'd showered off the attic dust and eaten leftovers for dinner, I found myself sitting on the back porch, watching the sky darken. He joined me, sitting close, the air cool, but not cold. We shared a blanket over our legs, like we used to do when he was a child. His shoulder touched mine, and neither of us moved away. "Can I ask you something?" he said after a long silence. "Of course. What's it like to be alone for so long?" The question caught me off guard. I didn't answer right away. I watched a plane blink across the sky, imagining the people inside going somewhere new. "It's quiet," I said finally. "Sometimes peaceful, sometimes it hurts." He nodded slowly. I never thought about it much until now. There was something deeper in his voice, something vulnerable. He wasn't just asking about me. He was asking about his own fears, about what waited for him down the line, about love and loss, and all the things we pretend won't touch us until they do. "I think," I said gently, "we all want to be seen, really seen, and held even when we're not asking for it." He turned his face to me, eyes soft and searching. "I see you." The words hung there between us, suspended in the cool night air. My breath caught, and for a moment I felt like I was looking at him through entirely new eyes, not as the boy I raised, but as a man who had grown into something steady and kind, someone I could talk to, trust, share silence with. My hand rested on the blanket between us. He placed his over mine, warm, steady, no pressure, just presence. "I'm glad I came back." He whispered, "Me too." I whispered back. He leaned in, his forehead resting gently against mine. It was not a kiss, not yet, but it felt like a moment that could have been, that might be, if either of us took the next breath differently. Then the porch light flickered old wiring, nothing new, but it was enough to make us both pull back slightly, blinking. "I should head up," he said, his voice low, eyes still on me. "Okay." We stood slowly. I watched him walk to the door, his hand pausing on the knob. Then he turned back and looked at me again. "Good night, Mom. Good night, sweetheart." He disappeared inside, and I stood there for a long while, the stars swirling above me, the scent of blooming lilacs in the air. Something unspoken had passed between us again, and it wasn't going away. The next few days unfolded in a quiet rhythm. Eric and I fell into a routine that felt oddly natural. Morning coffee shared in the kitchen, long walks through the neighborhood in the afternoons, small house chores we tackled together just to fill the time, but beneath it all there was a current neither of us addressed, a softness in his voice when he spoke to me, a stillness in the way I watched him move around the house. I found myself waiting for his footsteps in the morning, listening for the way he cleared his throat before coming down the stairs, the sound of him pouring cereal or flipping on the coffee machine. It wasn't obsession. It was something gentler and awareness, like noticing the seasons change. You don't always know the moment it happens, but you feel it in your bones. On Wednesday afternoon, it started to rain, a soft drizzle at first, then heavier, until the sky grew dark and the windows were streaked with water. I had lit a candle in the living room, the kind with the warm vanilla scent I always liked when the weather turned. Eric wandered in with a book, one I had lent him years ago, and asked if I wanted to sit and read with him. It felt sweet, almost childlike. We curled up on opposite ends of the couch, our legs stretched toward each other under a shared blanket. I didn't read. I watched the rain. I watched him pretend to read, though I knew his eyes hadn't moved across the page in some time. Eventually, he closed the book and rested it on the coffee table. His eyes met mine, and I felt the moment stretch again, that invisible line pull him tighter. "Do you remember when Dad used to read to us during storms?" he asked. "I do. He had that deep voice, always made the story sound more real." Eric smiled. "He loved you so much. I could always see it." I nodded, feeling a small ache in my chest. I'd loved him too, still do in a way. Eric shifted slightly, moving closer so our knees touched under the blanket. "I think about him a lot lately, about how he handled things, about what kind of man he was. He would be proud of you," I said, touching his hand gently. He looked down at our hands, then back up at me. "I think I've always been looking for that feeling again, the safety he gave me, the way he made things feel solid." His voice dropped lower. "And I feel that around you still, even now." I swallowed, my heart beat faster, my throat tightening in a way that was hard to explain. "You were always my reason for staying strong." He reached up and gently touched my jaw, his fingers light but deliberate. "You don't always have to be strong, you know." There was something about the way he said it, not like a son comforting a mother, but like a man seeing the woman behind the title, the woman who had carried so much on her own. My eyes fluttered shut. His hand remained at my cheek, warm and steady. When I opened them again, he was still watching me, searching, waiting for something unspoken. And then it happened, slow, hesitant, full of questions neither of us voiced. He leaned in, and our foreheads met first, soft and careful. His breath mingled with mine. He was trembling slightly, so was I. It wasn't a kiss, not yet, but we were right on the edge of it, teetering between the safety of what we'd always known and the possibility of something else, something more. I pulled back gently, my hand still on his. "Eric, we need to be careful." He nodded, not moving away. "I know. I'm not trying to hurt anything. I feel something, and I don't want to pretend I don't." The rain softened outside. The only other sound was the quiet hum of the candle burning beside us. "I feel it too," I admitted, barely above a whisper. His fingers interlaced with mine, warm and firm. "I don't want to lose this." "You won't," I replied. We sat like that for a long time, just breathing, holding hands, letting the moment settle around us. Nothing more passed between us physically. It didn't need to. There was already enough in the air, enough to change the shape of everything, whether we acted on it or not. Later that night, I stood in the kitchen, rinsing dishes, the window above the sink fogged from the warmth inside. Eric came in quietly behind me and placed a towel on the counter, drying the plates as I handed them to him. It felt like a dance we'd done 1,000 times, and yet something about it felt entirely new. As I reached for the last dish, he leaned in and kissed the back of my shoulder, soft, respectful, not demanding anything, just being close. I paused, heart racing. "I'm still your son," he whispered, "but tonight I just want to be someone who's here with you." Tears welled in my eyes. I didn't turn around. I just nodded and let the warmth of him, at my back, wrap around me like a blanket. It wasn't a night of answers. It was a night of recognition, a night that showed us both we were walking a line we hadn't expected. A line drawn with care, not confusion, a line neither of us wanted to cross without understanding what it would mean, but we had acknowledged it, and that alone changed everything. The days that followed passed with a gentleness I hadn't known in years, not hurried, not loud, just quiet understanding. We didn't speak of that night directly, not the moment on the couch, not the touch in the kitchen, not the way his voice shook when he said he just wanted to be here, but it lingered between us, shaping everything. Eric stayed longer than he'd planned. He said he hadn't found the right job yet, but I knew better. We were both caught in something delicate, something that didn't have a name, but had taken root in our lives like a vine curling through cracks, uninvited but impossible to ignore. I woke earlier than usual one morning and found him already in the garden. He was crouched by the rose bushes, trimming the dead heads like he'd seen me do 100 times. The sun was just beginning to rise, casting a soft orange glow through the mist. It was one of those mornings that made you feel like the world was whispering. "You're up early," I said. He looked up, smiling softly. Couldn't sleep. Figured I'd help out a bit. I knelt beside him, brushing my fingers over a newly opened bloom. "They're early this year." "Yeah," he said, then paused. "Maybe everything's just trying to bloom at the same time." We both chuckled quietly, though we both knew that wasn't what he meant. We stayed out there for an hour, side by side in the quiet. We didn't need to talk. Sometimes presence speaks louder than anything else. That evening I made a big dinner lasagna, garlic bread, salad, the works. I don't know why. Maybe because I needed something solid to hold on to, something familiar. As we sat down to eat, Eric was unusually quiet. His fork moved slowly, his gaze heavy with something that hadn't yet been said. Halfway through the meal, he set his fork down and looked at me. "I think I need to go," he said softly. I stopped, my hand still on my glass. Though I had known it was coming, he nodded. "It's been good here, better than I expected, but I don't want to stay just because it's safe." I swallowed hard. "Are you sure?" "No," he admitted, "but I think I need to figure out who I am without leaning on the past, without leaning on you." I looked down at my plate, my chest aching, but I understood. Maybe I understood better than he did. Sometimes love means stepping back. Sometimes it means not holding on, even when every part of you wants to. "I'll miss you," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "I'll miss you too," he replied, "more than I can say." We didn't cry, not then. We sat there and finished dinner like it was any other night. But when he stood to take his plate to the sink, he paused behind me and wrapped his arms around my shoulders, pressing his cheek to the top of my head. "Thank you," he whispered, "for seeing me, for letting me see you." That night, we sat in the living room one last time. No wine, no movie, just the two of us in the fading light. He rested his head on my lap the way he used to when he was little, and I ran my fingers through his hair, slowly, tenderly. "I don't know what this was," he said after a while, "but it mattered. It did." I said, "It still does." The next morning, I stood at the porch as he packed his car. He gave me one last hug, long, warm, full of everything we hadn't said, then he was gone. The house was quiet again, the way it had been before. But something inside me had changed. I wasn't just alone now. I was aware, awake. Something had stirred that I didn't know still lived inside me. That night I sat on the porch with a blanket over my lap and a cup of tea in my hand. I watched the stars blink into view one by one and thought of the way he looked at me. Not as a mother, not as a role, but as a woman. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel invisible. We had crossed a boundary, yes, but we had done it with care, with honesty, with restraint. We had held something delicate in our hands and passed it back to each other gently, without shattering it. He would go on and build his life, and I would stay here and continue mine. But something beautiful had bloomed between us in that brief window of time, something rooted not in desire, but in understanding. And I would carry it with me quietly, always. That evening had changed everything, and even now I still sit in the quiet and remember, not with regret, but with awe.